So what I wanted to talk about was swing playing, and swing playing is something that I think golfers get a little bit sort of lost in. And what I've noticed with quite a few online students recently is they tend to ask this question, which is when I'm sort of talking about having over the top tendencies, how come on their data that they're collecting from the ball flight, how come the club path is still reading in to out? So when we're looking at the club path, you're looking at a measurement in and around impact area. Okay, so and when I'm sort of been talking to my students about over the top tendencies or spinning out, or whatever it might be, I'm generally alluding to the idea that as they start the downswing, they're moving too much this way. Okay, but just because you move a lot this way, right, I could be quite aggressive with this sort of right hip and right shoulder moving forward. Let's pop a ball down here for sort of just reference. But I can allow my wrist angles to drop down, okay, early. So like if you like an element of a casting motion to still manage to control that club path, or even move that club path actually to the right too much. So one of the things that I try and do with those that have access to the equipment to eradicate that is, rather than just concentrating on club path and the bottom part of the golf swing, and for those of you that don't have data, things like a quad or whatever it might be, anything that's sort of capturing your club data, something that you might find as a strong reference is, you've had tendencies to swing over the top and slice the ball, so you've practiced with like a bucket. And what I'm trying to say is you'll still have these tendencies, but you can just drop your wrist positions down so you can kind of hit the ball without hitting the bucket, and you sort of get away with it, right? So that in essence is what I'm sort of saying. And that's why swing playing is something that you can measure more accurately. So for golfers, say with roughly a mid-iron, their swing plane will be too vertical because everything's moving this way, and you can't get away from that reading. And we don't want the swing plane to be too vertical. Obviously the plane will differ depending on the club, but let's just say that we're going for a low sort of 50s digit here, so closer to what I'm drawing on here, this line. So the answer to all of these problems when it comes to your sort of swing plane does come massively down to the pivot. Because even if you're somebody who has these tendencies of going this way, even if you pull your arms down, you're still going to be more prone to a more vertical plane. And the issue if you start swinging too vertically is, obviously, one, it's going to affect the delivery of the club. Two, it's going to affect the rate of closure of the club face a little bit. But also, as the clubs get longer, they don't want to be swung very vertically. So that's, again, one of the reasons why most amateurs are pretty good with the short to mid irons, but then struggle with the longer clubs as time goes on. So the way you eradicate this type of problem, and what I work on with all my students, is definitely coming down to that pivoting action. And you've got a couple of ways to do it. One way is that you sort of just make sure as you start the downswing, you're concentrating more on pulling the lead side back rather than firing the trail side forward. Other ways you can do it, if I sort of reintroduce my line here, you imagine that's now a wall. So I practice against the wall at home, and what we're not trying to do is we're not trying to move closer to the wall. We're trying to get the feeling that we're moving further away from the wall in that downswing. That lets that club drop nicely on the ball, again shallows out that plane. Or other ways you can do it is you can concentrate a little bit more on your weight. So maybe trying to think a little bit less on firing too quickly onto the toe, try and get a little bit more in towards that lead heel, and just work on that sequence. Just kind of work on being a little more patient, just sort of swinging back, pull that lead side, let that club drop down, and then you can kind of get up and through it from there. But I just wanted to have this conversation because it might help some of you guys out. See you soon.